Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. In this session, I'm going to demo Release 6, Conquest monthly updates that came into effect for June 2025. As you can see, I'm in my sample client scenario for John and Jane. And as a reminder, in the upper left corner, we can go into the hamburger icon, go to Support and Resources, and review the knowledge base and see what's new. As I mentioned, I'm reviewing Release 6, which came into effect around June 2025. And as you can see here, the table of contents that I'm going to review with you. Starting at the top with individual pension plan. This is a very welcomed addition to Conquest. So I really appreciate that they integrated this in now into the software so we can properly illustrate. We can now show it as an in-force IPP, or we can build it in as a recommendation if that's something you want to look at for your clients. As you can see here, IPPs are available within the accounts card on the client overview section. And we can link the IPP either to an employer or a corporation in the plan. I highly recommend that you integrate this in, leaning on the illustration that you have for the IPP. If it's in force, hopefully you can get a copy, or if it's a recommendation and you're using a provider such as Gordon B. Lang, you can get a quote and an illustration to see how it's funded, projected annual returns, actuarial assumptions, etc. As you can see here in this example, they're suggesting 7.5%. This is not an endorsement of Gordon B. Lang, but in my personal experience, this is the IPP provider that I've used for the assessments. And as you can see here, you can get a quote. But like I said, this is not an endorsement of GBL, but just in my personal experience, those are the folks that I've used the most times when I've looked at this option for clients. To move on, you can see in the accounts card, we have some controls. We can specify the beneficiaries, we have some settings, and the savings components. Just moving on before I head over to Conquest to show you that we can fund the IPP either with RSP accounts. So if you're just starting up the IPP, we can have the integration of the RSP transfer over to get things started, or we can show this annual savings that are required, the funding requirements that are coming from the employer or the corporation. And we can also integrate multiple savings. Perhaps there might be a shortfall in the future and we have to top up and provide additional savings because it has to meet that annual 7.5% rate of return. And if there's a shortfall, there's additional funding requirements required at times. So we can integrate all of those things within the IPP illustration. To receive benefits from the IPP, you can select between lifetime income or commuted value within the payment options. So as your client is approaching retirement, you can consider things just like the defined benefit pension options within Conquest. You can show lifetime income versus commuted value. We can do the same with the IPP as well. So really some nice features built in here. And as you can see in the settings component, that's where you can hit the drop-down menu and toggle between lifetime income and commuted value. I'll show you that in just one second. Just want to make sure. Yeah, so that's it. Let's head over to Conquest and we'll take a closer look at this. So within my sample client scenario, I'm going to illustrate as if the IPP is already in force, okay? It's already been set up, and we would just simply go to the accounts card. We would hit plus account. In this example, I'm going to use John. We can hover over other accounts, and then at the top here, individual pension plan. So there we go. So we can specify the current market value if there's a value in there now. Just going to put an arbitrary number in. We can head over to more data. And we can take a look at things like the holdings, the valuation date. We can set up the beneficiaries. The default is the co-client, in this example, Jane, or we can change to some other options. Here in the settings is where we can specify the jurisdiction, the payment options between lifetime income versus commuted value, the retirement date or payment start date, which can be retirement or a specific age in the future or a specific date. We can specify the primary benefit amount temporary benefit amount, and the indexation and survivor benefits. So you have lots of options here. We can specify fees within it. I would typically leave that off. And then here are the funding requirements or savings that we can integrate in with it. Just to draw your attention back up here. So this is where you select either link to employer. In my example, I have a corporation added called ABC Inc. I can link it to ABC Inc. Okay, so we can, from a cash flow perspective, if I set up the savings are actually going to come out of the corporation. Okay, and I'll show you that in a report in just a moment. So there you have it. You have an individual pension plan linked to the corporation. I put a market value in with the annual savings. So when I come out of here, I can go over to planning and I can reference my reports. I would typically go to the audit reports, and I can go up here to my quick topic reports. I'll head into corporations and let's take a look. I've got corporation detailed activity. So this is my go-to report when dealing with corporations, and we can see in the IPP contributions in the outflows. You'll see here there's a column. So the software is intuitive enough. It picks it up. It recognizes that there's an IPP linked, and we can see the annual contribution of $25,000 coming out. Okay, so that's all built into the software. And then in retirement, we will see in our projection the retirement inflows, outflows, or my go-to is the retirement paycheck right here. And we should see the pension. There it is, coming out in the future. So that's typically what would be done if you're illustrating an in-force IPP. Let's say you want to illustrate in Conquest a recommendation. Maybe you're taking a hard look at this. For your client, you've reached out to Gordon B. Lang and you've got a quote. And as I suggested a few moments ago, you want to heavily lean on that illustration to integrate the recommendation inside Conquest. So I'll just head back here to the accounts and I'll delete the individual pension plan. I'll delete it there. And then what I can do in the planning tab is I can position it as a recommendation. If I'm in expert planning mode, what I'd want to do is go to more and right at the bottom to the build a strategy. And I will do the IPP. Just for the purpose of time, I'm just going to enter some things here very quickly. And I'm going to do it as a recommendation for John. And I'll go to change data. I'll go to client data. I'll go to accounts. And here is where I can add the IPP account as a recommendation. There we go. So we've got the red star. Okay, it's not funded yet, so zero balance. I'm going to link it to ABC Inc. I'm going to leave the beneficiary as is. The settings, I'm going to start with lifetime income. And in the savings, I'm going to do the funding requirements, heavily leaning on that illustration. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to put in an arbitrary number. So there you have it. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind that I didn't mention previously is in the portfolio, there are expectations for rates of returns for IPP. And if it doesn't meet that rate of return, the actuarial assessment annually or whenever it's done will identify a shortfall and additional funding requirements could be made. And we can build that into additional savings if needed. But just to show you for the portfolio, what I might be inclined to do is go up to asset allocation, investment profiles, and I'll build a custom profile with that rate of return of 7.5%, as Conquest mentioned in the notes. It is an IPP. It's a registered account, right? It's a registered pension plan, individual pension plan, but it's a registered. So 7.5% interest would be fine. It's tax sheltered. And I'll just make a note here for IPP 7.5%. Then I can come back here and I can assign the portfolio for that 7.5%. So we can build a custom allocation, asset allocation, and assign it as the portfolio for the IPP. Now when I come out and add the strategy and X out of the audit reports, I have the IPP as a recommendation down below, if you can see that, okay? Now, the neat thing about this is we can do multiple fancy things with a report. So this is showing as a recommendation for the IPP. What I can actually do is if I'm interested in laying things out side by side, I can create a plan alternative. In this case, I'm just going to duplicate it. And I can also do an IPP recommendation. and I'll duplicate the plan. So now I have selected plan IPP recommendation. I'll go back to recommended, just take off the IPP down there. And so on the IPP recommendation, I have it on this one. So the fancy things I like to do is I go into audit reports. And for example, I can go into the retirement paycheck. There you are. I can duplicate the panel. I'll just take it out for a second, show how I did that. The little shield symbol. And I'll go duplicate panel. And here I can go recommended versus IPP. So I can compare and contrast side by side the different options, IPP versus not IPP, and you can see the outcome and if it's a suitable recommendation for your client. Not a lot of change between the two because I've got some things maybe very similar, but as I build out the planning, we would see maybe some contrasts between the two options. Okay, and that's what we want to highlight for our clients. So that's how I might integrate IPPs as a recommendation versus an in-force IPP. Food for thought. Let's head back to Conquest release notes and we'll move on to the next section, which are feature enhancements and the what if analysis page redesigned. So I love this. So the redesign makes a lot of sense because it keeps things a little more streamlined. I'm going to head back to Conquest for a second, take out these up here. So if you recall in the risk management, they did a redesign at some point last year, and we have the insurance analysis where we can add scenarios. Same thing with the what if analysis. They've kind of streamlined things. And as you can see, I've added in a few already in my demo of my demo in preparation. So I'll just take this out for a second and add it back in to show you how it's done. So what I do is we'll come here and we would add a scenario. So the what if analysis, now you can add the scenario, and here are those options that we still had before: market crash, disappointing return rates, inflation's higher, living longer, or a custom scenario. So when I add a market crash, that pop-up shows up for the settings right away. And so we can do the default 30% market drop 1 year after retirement and last for 4 years. But I can make that adjustment here. Let's say I wanted to illustrate a 50% market drop, and it happens 1 year, maybe 1 year before retirement. So I can make those adjustments. Got my spacings off here. There we go. And it'll last for 4 years. So we can adjust some of these things when they happen. You can fully customize it. So there it is. It shows attention required. And in this available investments report, we can see that little dip there. That's the market correction, 50% drop 1 year before retirement, which is right here. So a great way to put things into perspective for clients. If you have the nervous Nelly, you can stress test your plan and show, the impact of things such as a market crash. We can add additional scenarios, maybe disappointing return rates. And as a side note, you'll notice you have this option, stress factors. So you can layer in multiple stress factors on top of each other. So you're just sort of compounding everything, doing an extreme situation maybe to show maybe the negative outcome that could happen for those nervous Nelly clients and ensure that they're okay. But you'll see right away, attention is required. So what do we have to do? We either have to save more, retire later to adjust for that, or make your clients aware of, in this scenario, what if this were to happen? How would we react to it? Okay. I didn't point this out, but just to go back in, we have the disappointing return rates. We have strategies on the left here. So in the thinking in terms of if this were to happen, how would your client react? And in that reaction, that emotional response, or once logic then kicks back in, hopefully they're working with an advisor such as yourself, and you can give solid advice. And we can say, how would we react to this? Would we save more? Increase savings? Would we budget additional assets, or make some changes so we have more? We have a bank of different things we can do to be proactive versus reactive in this extreme situation. Okay, so lots of great things, and we can just sort of click on it. And if we show a client, if this were to happen, you take this proactive or reactive response, and we can see the dollar amount, and we can make adjustments as we see fit, and hopefully we can get back on track to the retirement goal. But you can see in this example, there's unfortunately still a shortfall. So it helps put things in great perspective for your client. So let's head back to the release notes, and I'll move on to the next section, which is SAM Insights. Data, concern, insight. So I like some of the additions here with SAM Insights. You'll notice over the last few months, Conquest has really built out the SAM Insights component up here. I've taken it out, but I'll just go back here a second and I'll go into settings, and you'll notice there's the SAM score visibility. I turned it off actually, and we have the SAM score here and the SAM score here. So this was a monthly update that happened, I think, either last month or the previous month. And it's just a feature that I tend to gets in my way a little bit. I'm still adjusting to it, to be honest. So I've turned it off, but I'll just leave it back in for the moment. But SAM Insights is providing items needing attention. So it will flag concerns around overfunding RSPs, overfunding TFSAs, and going beyond the maximum annual limits, and which can cause penalties, as you well know. So let me exit out here for a second. So in my software, I've got starting tax values just to do an estimate. Okay, so the software is going to pick up just the RSP contributions, 18% up to the maximum annual contribution for this client for 2025 moving forward. So to show you how this works, and with the enhancement with SAM Insights, if I go into the RSP account, into the savings and add a savings or recurring, and let me put in an amount that I know will pull it over the annual threshold. So there you go. It highlights it in yellow. So this is the new addition with SAM Insights. It's flagging that RSP over contribution. Okay, and then we'll have an integrity concern right here, flagging the over contribution. And just like before in the planning tab, we have the KPIs up here. We've flagged the RSP over contribution. This was always here before and something I always kept an eye on. Similarly to the TFSA, if we went over the limits, it would be flagged up here. So they've just built in a couple of additional layers to say, hey, keep in mind, you're going over the limits here. We want to keep things in check. Okay, so that's the enhancement there with regards to SAM Insights. Let's move on. Transferring to a RRIF. So transfers from an RSP, FHSA, and RRIF to another RRIF are now supported within the client data transactions card. So we can do that. Let's go back up here into the client overview section. And let me just quickly check my account. So in my example, I've got our RRIF account 1, RRIF account 2. So what we're allowed to do now with the transactions card, as you can see, I was playing around earlier, but I'll start from scratch again. I have an RSP account with 200,000. So what I can do is I can transfer that to any of these eligible accounts, to a TFSA, I could deregister registered assets into the TFSA or a bank account, or over to that RRIF account. And we can start RRIFing sooner than later and control the amount we want to RRIF. Also, you'll notice down below, I'll take this out, start from scratch again. I can go from RRIF account 1 and I can transfer over to RRIF account 2. So these are the additional features within the transactions card. I forgot to mention earlier with the IPPs, in the event we have an IPP, we can build in that transaction for the funding. If it's just getting started up and a transfer from the RSP, same thing. We do the transfer over and we would choose the IPP account that would show up in here. Forgot to mention that. Okay, so nice additional controls there. And update to SAM strategy, split income using a spousal loan. Okay, so previously, the split income using a spousal loan at Conquest modeled the spousal loan as an interest income and corresponding carrying charges and interest expense. However, they're now modeling the spousal loan as an interest-only spousal note, receivable for the lender, and corresponding interest-deductible liability for the borrower. The spousal loan strategy will now incorporate the net worth impacts per individual of this SAM strategy. Okay, so income splitting opportunities using spousal loans are available. That was an enhancement made quite a few months ago now. But depending on your client scenario, if you're in expert planning mode, you might see listed here a suggestion for a spousal loan. And you can click on it. It does the loan interest rate at the prescribed lending rates by CRA. And that's just showing the changes of how it's modeling the spousal loan, interest-only spousal note receivable for the lender and corresponding interest-deductible liability for the borrower. So just as an FYI. Let's move on to assumption changes. And we have a couple here. The first one being charitable donation impacts to expense owner. Okay, so charitable donation tax credits were always available, but now they're claimed prior, they were claimed by the highest earner. Now they're claimed by the person or individual who made the charitable donation. What does that mean? Let's take a look in Conquest. So we can go back to the client data section. We can go into the expense card. And as you can see here, I've teed up a couple of charitable donations. You would add them in through either pre-retirement expense, charitable donation, just like that, or you can also do it in the retirement expense section. Okay. The neat thing about this is Conquest calculates the taxes or the charitable tax credit for making that charitable donation. In my example, I used $200 for John and $100 for Jane. I'll just take this out as it's triplicating things. There we go. So we can illustrate this, and then we can review things like reports. Sorry, I'll go over here. I'll X out, go into my audit reports. And I can view things like income tax, and I can go to the multi-year income tax summary, and we can choose the member. So again, I'm going to duplicate the panel. And on one side, I'm going to have John, and the other side, I can do Jane. I'm getting in the way here. But down below, we can see, hopefully I can find it, donations. Okay, so there it is. Total credits before donations and gifts, and then donations and gifts. There we go. There we go. So we can see the dollar amounts being deducted by the person making the charitable donation themselves, rather than just the high income earner. So that's the change there. The final component is Canadian sample clients. Now, if you're a Canada Life advisor or an advisor using Conquest through the Canada Life version, unfortunately, we do not have the sample clients. Bill and Susan Adams, Justin and Haley Beebs, Bob Clark, Danny, and Tess Smith. So if you are a Conquest user outside of Canada Life, IDC World Source, Purpose Investments, or other, you will have access to that. And how you access it, I'll show you really quickly, although it won't show up for me. You go hamburger icon, exit the client list, and then back into the hamburger icon, and you would go to support and resources, and you would see an option for those sample client scenarios in there. So that's how you would access it. Back to John and Jane sample. As you can see, I'm at the end of my Conquest demo for R6. Hope you found this useful, beneficial. Should you have any questions, please reach out. And did you like this video? I'm curious to know who's watching this right to the end. If you are someone who stuck with me right to the end, thank you so much. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, like, and put a comment down below. I'm curious to know what you're getting out of this, any questions you may have, or I would appreciate some encouragement to keep going. Thank you so much. Have a great day.